We're live now? Okay. So we will go ahead and start this meeting now, and it is 2:08. I will call the meeting for November 14th, 2023 to order. We need to establish a quorum. I'm going to ask you all to state your name for the record, and we'll start with Mr. Carrington.
Bo Carrington, I'm here.
Kurt Burkhart, here.
John Shepherd here.
Marcia Joseph here. And I'd also like to mention that we do have other Albemarle County staff here. We have Mr. Herrick, Andy Herrick is here. And we also have Bart Svoboda. And is Francis still here? Yes, we do. We still have Francis
know.
McCall and Marcia Ellie. And we also have our wonderful attorney, James Bowling is here.
Like we should.
Okay. We have no one on Zoom. There are no public hearings scheduled. So we'll move on quickly to the first item on the agenda, which is approval of the minutes for August 1st, 2023. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? Anyone find anything that they'd like to amend, revise, add?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to thank Ms. Alley for inserting what I'd requested from the previous meeting. It was done to my satisfaction. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to say that over the last few months, I think the minutes have improved. The took a little while, I think, for Ms. Golden to sort of get the hang of how to consolidate them. And I think we're now at a good state with, there's enough in them to document the meeting without going overboard. So thanks for that.
Okay, if there are no comments concerning the minutes, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from August 1st, 2023 of the BZA.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Any further discussion on the minutes? Okay, Ms. Alley, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Shepherd,
Aye.
Mr. Carrington,
Aye.
Mr. Burkhart.
Aye.
Ms. Joseph,
Aye. Okay, we have approved our minutes of August 1st. We will now move on to the old business. And as you all know, we have talked about this before, and I just wanted to get you up to speed as to what's been happening since the last time we spoke. Is that Mr. Carrington and I have met with staff and talked about what the process might be. I have spoken with Mr. Bowling, and we came up with this list of reasons why it may be a good idea for us to ask for an alternate. And these are something that I've heard from you guys, I've heard from, and so we wrote them down, and Mr. Carrington was able to amend them, and we got information from staff about this too. Now, the other thing is if we go ahead and approve this, how do we present this? And Mr. Bowling states that it's a simple letter that we can send to the Board of Supervisors to ask if they would ask the circuit court to allow us to have an alternate. Correct?
That's correct. An alternative is to ask the staff to do it for you, but the staff may not be in agreement completely. So this gives due deference to the staff's 2 cents worth and starts the procedure as one board to another, if you will.
And I guess with the comment that we just received from Mr. Bowling, I would like to ask staff how they felt if there may be a simple sentence placed in the letter, if this is affirmed, that staff had no objection to this. Andy, Bart? Yeah.
Good afternoon, Andy Herrick. I'm the Deputy County Attorney. I think that the way that would be presented is it would probably put on an agenda of the Board of Supervisors. I don't think it would be on the consent agenda because I think that staff would want the opportunity to present it with staff's own recommendations and analysis of the request. So it's certainly something that staff can take the recommendations of the BZA to the board, but I think that staff would probably want to have a staff report there as well before the board discusses the issue, Board of Supervisors.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Herrick?
But as a procedural thing, is this request coming from staff or coming from the board?
Well, I mean, if the board makes that request, it would be from the BZA rather than from staff.
That's why you can send a letter directly to the Board of Supervisors from the chairman, if that's how you want to proceed.
But
But in order for the Board of Supervisors to act on it, would need to do so at a meeting. And that's the point at which it would consider the request and the rationale of the BZA, as well as any analysis that staff might have as well.
So you send a letter to the Board of Supervisors and you copy the staff, and that'll get it started.
I think so. I mean, so I think it would probably be routed to the clerk of the Board of Supervisors, who is in charge of scheduling the matters that come before the Board of Supervisors. And that's the point at which both the letter would be put on the board's agenda as well as any staff analysis.
Barcelona zoning administrator. This is a new thing, right, for us as a locality? So we haven't had this request from the board. As staff, we're also not sure that the board would ask us for our opinion, or what do we think? What are the budget implications? Things like that may happen. They may just take it on the letter and schedule it. So also part of that process is just to make sure that, there's, if there's an opportunity for us to discuss it, because we've talked about it here, but what we haven't done from the staff perspective is talk about budget implications and different things like that. So I don't envision much of that, a large budget impact, but I don't know where the board is with that. So with this being a first time request, the board may not ship it to staff for comment. They may take it on their own. If we insert staff into that letter, then we may be putting staff into the process either prematurely or not. So there's different things we want to let the board kind of make that decision on how they want to go through with the process. That makes sense.
Mr. Rosenberg, we didn't talk about this at all, just sort of the process at this point in time. So we really haven't discussed any of the meat of this. It was just sort of a background as to what Mr. Carrington and staff and I have been doing since the last time we met. And
I see.
then what the process might be if this board decides to go forward. So
Okay,
that's where we are.
okay, thank you.
is it fair to ask, or, well, I'm gonna ask, are you and Bo and staff, just generally speaking in those meetings, are you all on the same page? Are there different implications from that aren't quite that are all lined up or not? Are there questions there? If that's a yes, I wonder if we could sort of maybe understand if there's a preliminary things we could talk about and maybe want to tweak this a little bit or not. I don't know where the process all stands. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think the idea of this was for all us to get together to look at this and see whether it was something that we agreed to, didn't agree to, wanted to amend. But as far as staff, I mean, that's the one thing that I asked you guys and initially, is it something that at some point, not right now, don't say it right now, that you would be comfortable in saying that you had no objection to? I'm not asking you to support or endorse or anything, but just no objection. So
I would request that any letter that you sent to the board not include staff analysis. Obviously, the BZA can reach its own conclusion, its own recommendation. We will faithfully present the recommendation of the request of the BZA to the Board of Supervisors, but then staff would like the opportunity also to present its analysis of the request to the board without having any sort of commingling of the recommendation of the BZA and the staff.
Okay.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna try and answer John's question. It's my opinion, after sitting in a couple meetings and phone calls, that there are still some outstanding questions, budgetary and otherwise. But that at a high level, it seemed like everybody on those calls agreed that these were legitimate points of advocacy. That there may be some counterpoints, some negatives that are not on the sheet. But I think there was general momentum towards advancing this conversation, and they seemed positive, in my opinion.
Has there been any conversation with your counterparts in Greene, Loudoun County, Virginia Beach, Fairfax County, Richmond, asking how their process has worked? And as you talked about the budget implications, I'm sort of curious about the absences. I think we got pretty good attendance here, and I've not heard since I've been on 2.5 years any recusals where somebody might have to come in on that. Based on the increase that they pay us per meeting to come in, I'm just wondering that if an alternate, I'm asking several different questions. If an alternate were to come in because a member on this board had to recuse his or herself on a particular matter, is that alternate paid on a prorated basis just for that, or would they be paid the entire amount just to sit on that one matter? And we might have a full agenda. That might be the only thing on the agenda.
Right, so we haven't solicited feedback from the other localities, just based on my experience in Greene. That particular locality, if the member showed, then they got paid. Right, and that's not a discussion we've had with our finance department here, how that would work. So based on the size of the budget and what the increase would be based on the number of meetings we have, that is, we'll call that minimal for parts of that discussion. But for the part of the discussion we have with finance about adding no new FTEs, no new positions to our budget or to our things, that now is, well, no, not such now it is a big deal, because that falls in the term of part-timer, what that does to the direction under budget of saying, don't add any people no matter what, operate within the confines of what you have. So it's depending on, as we filter through the different lenses of and requests that we have for budget, for staffing, for effectiveness, for the valid points that are in the memo, those are all things that we'll have to look at as part of our analysis. So what we don't want to do is taint the BZA's desire to have that and have that be a pure request from y'all. So I don't know if that helps answer the question or not. So we had not reached out to any other localities. Depending on which lens you use to look at the budget impact, whether it's the BZA budget, whether it's the CDD budget that supports that, right? Whether it's the overall county budget, the more we go up the scale, the smaller that number appears to impact. But based on budget finance directions on no part-timers, no additional, operate with zero increase, then that's a different thing. So there's different things that we'll have to analyze depending on what the board decides, right?
What's your experience in Greene County?
It was fine. It was okay. Yeah, so I think the member may have sat only a few times. I'd have to go back and check the record. We didn't have a lot of, it happened during a time when the conflict of interest form was updated and reintroduced to the BZA. So we had some members who were in conflict about what they would do, what they wouldn't do based on that form as far as filing it. So the direction from the Commonwealth's attorney up there was that if you don't fill out the form, you can't vote. So they didn't resign, but they didn't fill out the form. So we had a interesting dance, a different kind of situation than what's outlined and your kind of pros and cons and trying to have somebody trained up, having somebody available, those sorts of things. So it was a little bit different. We also had within the town BZA, we combined the two because the town only had 300 people. And if you take that 10%, all those people were volunteering for other things that run the town, and we couldn't get enough folks to be on the BZA, or by the time the BZA had a meeting every 3 years, they were moved away, or we'll call it moved on. And so we had to do a combination there. So there were a little more mitigating circumstances in there, but having to do the extra packet and having the folks at the meeting, that wasn't an issue. The hardest part for the alternative member, if they were present, is not participating in the conversation, because you're not part of the board and you're not part of the public. So your opinion stays in the chair, right? You don't, because you're not on, you're that member that's needed if you're there. So if the 5 of you are here and there's an alternative member, you don't ask that member what they think, because they're not part of the conversation. Right? So there's some rules in there to be careful. It'll get funny.
Mr. Herrick, I think this question may be to you. The rules and the way that this comes to fruition, if it does, how are those procedures or policies set? Is that set by the Board of Supervisors? Is that something staff would suggest in order to think about who gets paid when? Do you get paid if you show up, or do you only get paid if you are asked to step in for an absent member? Those nitty-gritty details, how do those get set?
Right. So those are spelled out actually in your agenda package on page 10 and 11 of your agenda package. The state law, that's highlighted towards the end, details exactly what the specifications are. And specifically, it provides that the qualifications, terms, and compensation of alternate members shall be the same as those of regular members. So that's set by state law. A regular member, when he knows that he will be absent from or will have to abstain from any application and meeting, shall notify the chair 24 hours prior to the meeting of such fact. And then the chairman shall select an alternate to serve in the absent or abstaining member's place. So it's spelled out right there in the state law that's part of your agenda package.
I think there's still some questions.
Okay.
Thank you. That's helpful. But where they sit, whether they're allowed to opine or not, there are still some gaps for me when I read that.
And so to the extent that it's not covered by state law, it could be part of the rules of procedure of the BZA.
Thank you.
Which we set in January, correct?
Correct. But those are subject to amendment at any time.
Okay.
With sufficient notice as provided in the rules themselves.
I want to just say that one of my classmates, and I'll cover a little bit about the BZA training I went through in VCU this past summer. One of my classmates was the alternate retired Admiral Art Morrell. He was a alternate in Greene County, and he emailed me recently and said he just got appointed as a standing member of the BZA. So he attended the meetings. He got all the agenda packets that were sent out. To his credit, he attended the training session, so he was ready to fill the seats. So there's some good points to be made for that.
Are there any other questions, concerns?
I think the overriding one for me is number 5, a tie vote.
Okay.
We talked a lot about this with Mike Chandler, by the way, says hi. He was pleased to see that you're on the board here. But it's the 2-2 vote. That makes it really, really difficult. It leaves it difficult for the zoning administrator, leaves it difficult for the applicant, wondering what would have happened had that extra person been there and had a full board. I think it really, I think anybody that comes before this body on an appeal, is deserving to have a full board vote. And for that reason, I think that number 5 is probably the strongest reason that I can think of as to why we might want to advance the idea of having an alternate, the option to have an alternate appointed.
What was Mr. Chandler's comments on that?
He said it's really to the advantage of the BZAs to have a full board. He asked how many in the room were alternates. If you raised their hands, we had about 41 people attending. And he applauded those. He said there's only a few localities that have them. And nothing more than that, but there was no real guidance. It was just sort of, I think anytime there's a matter that comes before the board, it's always helpful to have, those absences filled so that the applicant and the zoning administrator can say it was a clear direction rather than, a tie.
Honestly, my concern was always about the time it takes for someone's seat to be filled. Because as you guys have heard me say before, it took 5 months by the time I applied and then the time I was appointed. And we've had that happen. David Bowerman left us. I mean, Mr. Rosenberg, you were really quick, which surprised the heck out of me because when Mr. Rob left, I figured we were going to be for another 5 months.
May I ask a question about succession? It's listed here as the number 1 point, which is what you're talking about. I wonder, is there anything, and maybe I can address this to Mr. Herrick or Mr. Svoboda. Is there any way that they can see that succession could be accelerated?
Oh, interesting.
Absolutely. I think that the best way to address succession would be for the members of the BZA to have sort of a successor, proposed successor in mind, and to sort of encourage that proposed successor to have on file an application with the circuit court. So that at the time that the current members of the board choose to leave office, that there's already a successor lined up and ready to go on file with the circuit court. That would be, again, my suggestion in terms of how to accelerate the succession process.
Mr. Bowling, do you have any thoughts on that?
And it's a tough question because the Board of Supervisors appoints the BZA
Right.
members, Andy.
No, that's not correct.
No.
They're
Oh,
appointed by
the
the
judge
circuit
does.
court.
The judge
does.
But the
Yeah.
board, hadn't the board traditionally recommended to the circuit court judge who to appoint?
No, not here. The circuit court has requested that the county's involvement be no more than collecting interested applications.
I
and
got you.
forwarding.
Okay, well,
Right.
good. Then corrected.
But that solution requires some foresight, right? Like, so,
Yes.
if one of us gets hit by a bus, of course, that is not going to help.
That's correct.
Well,
Also,
That's the least bad thing that would happen in the hypothetical that the BZA has only 4 members. The person in the hospital recuperating, I'm sure, would think about other things. Let me ask this, because I feel for the people who believe that 5 people should be here to rule on individual requests. And I think that's important because I think you need to give people the sense that they've had their day, even if they lose. I mean, that they've had their day to have people listen to what they believe. And just to facilitate that, accelerating succession is one issue, I think. The second issue is clarity in future scheduling. One of the things that I find frustrating is, and maybe you don't know because you don't know the cases that are going to be coming before us, is the uncertainty, that can be months long about whether will there be a meeting in, January, February, et cetera. So I guess another question to Mr. Herrick might be, is there any way to accelerate the clarity of future meetings so that this kind of vacation planning, maybe not getting hit by a bus, but other things that are predictable. Is that possible in any way?
So as you probably know, the annual calendar, the annual meeting schedule is set at the organizational meeting each
Okay.
January. And so that's the first Tuesday of every month, with
Sure.
a couple of exceptions, one of which is maybe the first week of July with the 4th of July holiday.
Right.
If the 4th of July falls on that first Tuesday of July, that may be an issue. And then the
Mhm.
first Tuesday of November is oftentimes election day.
Yeah,
But other than that, if BZA members simply hold the first Tuesday of the month,
okay,
that calendar is set at the organizational meeting.
I see.
And then if the meetings are canceled, as they
Right.
often are due to a lack of business, then that frees up that day.
Well, I understand that, and the first Tuesday issue is predictable, but the cancellations seem to be fairly common. I mean, maybe I've been here too brief a time. Maybe these meetings were monthly in the past. They were not. Okay. Going back to my initial point, is it possible for us to know faster when there won't be a request? Is there any way you can think of?
So Miss Alley typically sends out a notice 30 or 60 days prior to a meeting. If we've come within that time prior to a meeting and no applications have arrived.
Right.
I believe Miss Alley is pretty prompt about sending out a
Okay.
notice saying no applications have been received.
Okay.
You can remove the
Okay.
30 to 60 day out meeting. And Miss Alley can
Yeah.
correct me on the timeline if I'm mistaken, but that's typically what happens.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, go ahead.
Also, and just to, I think to add a point to that, I understand there can be times when people will withdraw their applications at the 11th hour.
Oh, really?
That can
Right.
happen.
Yep.
So a meeting can be canceled for that reason, but then also, there's a strict timeline that must be met, when an application comes in, and they have a right
Right.
to be heard
Within a
a
period.
certain amount of
Right, right.
time, so several moving wheels that can either, but also a deferral can be asked, so
Yeah.
the appellant is controlling the time, to an extent.
Can withdraw or can extend. I understand those possibilities. I just have a third point and I'll stop talking about the Zoom meeting. We had one participant in our recent meeting do it via Zoom, and I thought that was very effective, as far as I was concerned. And not that that should be the norm, that people shouldn't be here, but that, talking heads on a screen. But I think, we should not make light of that possibility to get the 5 so that the people who come before this group actually do get 5 people to vote on their request. So not to, was there anything exceptional about that case? Or is that just, the way we handled it with the Zoom?
I'm sorry, exceptional about which case?
I thought you were away once and that was perfectly fine with me. And I just wondered, it was our procedure for doing that is I assume an acceptable and accepted procedure.
Absolutely. It's relatively new in that it's post-COVID. As you may know, the General
Right.
Assembly modified some of the
Right,
rules
right.
about remote participation.
Right.
And BZA now has a set of bylaws that's fully compliant with state law.
Right.
Enables members to participate remotely, not all the time, but on certain reasons,
Occasionally.
a certain number of times.
Right.
So that's another option that's available to avoid the
Yeah.
2-2 tie or the 4-member split that has been a
Or a
concern.
lack of quorum even, if someone gets sick.
There does need to be a quorum physically present in order to
Okay.
admit remote members. So there
Okay.
does need to be a quorum present for the meeting in order.
And that's 3.
That's
Right,
correct.
Right.
So there needs to be at least 3 people present physically in
Right,
order
right,
to allow the
right,
remote
right.
participation.
Yeah, that brings up something that we've talked a little bit about in this conversation is just that, the quorum is 3. And so we use this term full board, which I think is certainly a good ideal. And certainly 4 presents an opportunity for a split vote, but I think that it's good to point out that, a full board is technically 3. Of course, that's not ideal. With 4 almost being worse.
One more brief question for Mr. Herrick. You said that the applicant can defer, which the applicant can. Can the board defer?
Yes, I mean, the board can accept a motion to defer and can vote on a motion to defer. There is the restriction that appeals have to be heard within 90 days.
Oh, so it has to be within that window.
That's correct. It's not jurisdictional. So the Supreme Court has ruled that
Huh.
if it's not heard within 90 days, that doesn't mean an
It's
automatic.
presumptively. I
That's
see.
correct.
Yeah, I
But
see.
I mean, so there's not a consequence for violating that 90 days.
Yeah,
We obviously try to in all cases to get folks
Sure,
heard within
sure.
those 90 days that state law provides.
yeah. The reason excuse me, one last thing. The reason I said that was I wondered if we were in a situation where we had four or three even, and we didn't feel comfortable in having the resolution based on the three or four people voting, if we could initiate maybe a 1-month deferral, or even less, that wouldn't have to be, so that the fifth member or the fourth and fifth members would be here and we could have the full board, as you say, so that we can manage it in this way too, rather than having 3 people vote, on.
That's one way to do it. The statute already provides that in the event of a tie, the applicant can request that the matter be deferred to the next
I
meeting
see.
for the
Can
fifth
punt,
member to be
okay.
present.
Okay, I didn't
So
realize
there
that.
is a safety valve, if you will.
Okay,
for a
But
tie
actually,
vote.
Isn't that a rehearing?
Well, essentially, it is a
Yeah,
it's
like
a
I mean,
redo.
after- when they-
Yes,
When they got a tie, the applicant could ask for the matter to be reheard.
that's
correct?
correct.
Yeah.
That's how I see it, Andy. You don't just play it before the fifth member and
Yeah,
do a vote. You
so
hear it
the-
all over again with a new.
Well, it's a
public hearing.
provision of 15.2-2311D in any appeal taken pursuant to this section, the appeal section of the state code. If the board's attempt to reach a decision results in a tie vote, the matter may be carried over until the next scheduled meeting at the request of the person filing the appeal. So the term that the state law used is carried over.
Carried over.
I'm not sure whether that means reheard or voted on again, but it is carried over. I read that, I guess, is similar to deferred.
And I suppose you keep carrying it over till you get 5 here.
So, and Mr. Swoboda wanted to clarify the
Sure.
timing in terms of 90 days.
Okay,
On that meeting schedule, you'll see there's a 60-day lag between when you file and when the meeting is scheduled. The reason for that, we don't do 90 or a longer period of time, is so the board has the ability to make that one deferral to the 90 days and still meet our obligation under the Code of Virginia. So that's kind of the timing on that. That's why that
Although it's not jurisdictional.
the 90 is, but the 60 is not.
No?
So let me
No.
just correct.
Yeah.
So
No, it's not.
jurisdictional means that it would get dismissed.
Right.
And so Mr. Bowling's correct. It is not jurisdictional, but we would not I don't think staff would ever recommend deferring beyond the 90 days
Right.
without the applicant's consent.
but let me understand you clearly. So is there a hard 90-day limit on if we were to defer
No,
or if
no.
there's not? So we could say defer 1 month, get to 90 days. And if we still didn't have 5, we might want to defer again until the next month when we
Only
would.
with the applicants.
Well, the applicant has a right to
Right,
defer.
but only from that. We couldn't do it on our own motion. Is
I
that?
suppose you could, but why would you want to do it? I mean, you hadn't voted on the matter.
Well, how would we know it was a 2-2 tie if we
I think
hadn't
lots
voted?
of times you can figure it out, in my experience. But maybe
That's
not.
true.
And when
That's
you do
true.
tie, somebody can pipe up and say, well, it's tied. That means that the zoning administrator's decision
It
rules.
stands,
And if you
right.
want to appeal, you can appeal to the next, carry it
Right,
over to the
right,
next, not
right.
appeal, but you can carry it over to the next meeting and
Right.
have the board reconsider it again.
Wait a minute, would you go over that again? So it's at the meeting itself, if this board is 4 and it's
Right.
tied, then this board can decide that it can rehear it?
No, it can
No,
tell the
the other way.
applicant that there's a tie vote. That means the zoning administrator's decision prevails. However,
Right.
if you don't agree with it, which we assume you don't, you can request that the matter be carried over to the next meeting
Right.
to where the full
After
5.
we've made a vote, after we've made that vote, after we've made the
You've
2
got
to
2
2
to
vote,
2.
then they can request at the meeting that it be carried over.
Yes.
Okay,
The applicant can.
The
okay,
applicant.
so the decision isn't final.
Well, it's up to the applicant to make that request.
Yeah.
But it would be, I mean, by its own terms, state law says if the board's attempt to reach a decision results in a tie vote.
Right.
And obviously you can't get to a tie vote without the
Voting.
vote actually having been taken.
Right?
So-
Yes.
So that's the point at which the applicant, again, it can be carried over to the next scheduled meeting at the request of the person
the
filing the
person,
appeal.
right.
Remedy.
Does that have to happen at the meeting? Or can
No.
that happen
No, it
10
can
days
happen
later? It can happen
The
later.
statute doesn't say it
Doesn't
has to
say.
happen at the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Some 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
That gets kind of murky too, but you want to comply with what the code is.
Right.
If it says 90 days, you don't want to get in the habit of,
Yeah.
well, let's do 95 because that doesn't look good.
I think
Well,
this
all you're
kind
doing
of-
is you're inviting a grounds of appeal, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Occurs to me that this conversation with all of the possibilities, the range of possibilities that can occur when you don't have the 5 members there, there are remedies each step of the way, but it would be a convenience to the appellant, assuming all things considered, to be able to call in an alternate, hear it when they're ready, when their attorney is ready to roll, it's all scheduled, they're prepared, they want us to, they had an expectation their end that it was scheduled for a particular day. And having the alternate would allow that to occur without the taking these other measures. I mean, it's like almost a customer service consideration or a matter of convenience to them, as well as if I knew there was an alternate, I would be much more inclined to if I was going to be out of town and out of the time zone, where I would realize that I could phone in on Zoom, which I've done on other committees from other places. If there was an alternate in my place, I would not do that and know that things were in good hands. I really appreciated you taking off, beach mode and, went back into BZA mode for 4 or 5 hours and then went back to whatever you were doing. Much appreciated, but to have had a backup would have been good thing.
I'm asking to go back a few months. You'll remember Atlas and the porta potties.
Mhm.
Okay, and the floodplains. I had asked at that time, and we were running up to that 90 days, I recall. It was about a week, or we didn't have a whole lot of time to play with. I'd asked about a deferral, whether or not we could defer it, and I was told that this board could not seek the deferral. The deferral had to come from the applicant or the appellant. So now I'm confused. Could you give some clarity as to deferrals?
So as I recall in that particular case, my advice to the board was that it couldn't be deferred without the applicant's consent, and the applicant was not consenting. The applicant wanted a vote that day.
I remember that. Yeah.
So
I wanted a deferral. They did not.
that's
They
correct.
rolled the dice.
That's correct. And I mean, I suppose it's possible that the board could have gone against the request and done the deferral without them. But then as Mr. Bolton suggests, what that does is that would put the board past the 90 days
Mhm.
and give the applicant grounds for appeal.
Okay, thank
It
you.
would just, I would advise against that. It would create an appearance of going against the rules of law, first of all. And if the applicant says, I don't want a deferral, go ahead and vote.
No, I remember that he was pushing the vote. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. As probably we should think about, because we could do this all day, right? As far as the what ifs. So as we start to wrap this up, a couple things to think about is that if the board approves this, we're going to have to look at the bylaws and things and have those in place prior to a member coming on board, right? If that's the way the board goes. some of the things to think about how we're gonna handle is I get a 2-2 vote because somebody abstained, not because they weren't here or that they recused themselves. Okay, so I have a valid thing. So that's something that you have your 5 members and they just didn't vote.
Right.
And so to the optics of that and saying, well, I want to have another meeting and the same 5 show up, I can't sub that out. Right? If there's not a legitimate reason for that member to recuse themselves or that they're absent. So some of the really far out there things that we would have to deal with if we have 5 seating folks that either, what happens if somebody recuses themselves? What happens if somebody just abstains? I have no conflict. I just don't want to vote. And it ends up in that tie. So there's different things to think about as we go through bylaws and some different things, right? When we talk about what happens when somebody requests it, we only have 4 and there's a 2-2 tie. As I look at that code section, this is something that we would have to talk about with the attorneys is, says the next scheduled meeting in order to provide the public, the neighbor who's complaining or the person who wants the decision, how far out is that, right? Is that our next scheduled meeting on the schedule? Is that our next scheduled meeting when we get an application? So there's some due process things to consider in that decision would, the best optics on that is that that's made at that meeting to go to the next meeting. Because everybody who wants knowledge about that application or want to participate in an application is present at that time, right? They're monitoring that particular meeting where the decision is being made. So we defer to a date specific is kind of generally what we call it. So different things to think about as we move forward in alternates and other things like that. So just some other lenses there. Mr. Burkhardt, I didn't know if you had a question.
No.
I will say I'm often accused of making things too complex, and I just don't think this is that complex. And it kind of like brings to mind KISS, keep it simple, stupid. You know, if a board member wants to say, I want to abstain because I don't feel right about participating, I think we'd be crazy not to let him do it, you know? And who's gonna challenge that board member? But I just don't see this being a huge problem regardless of what the Board of Supervisors decides to do, one way or the other, except it may keep you from having to do a redo, which I can assure you all the members who participated in the first meeting would not be particularly excited about participating in the second and hearing the same thing all over again. But really, and that's maybe an argument for the courtesy to the current board members. When you do have an abstention or an absence for whatever reason, and you've got a mechanism where you can have somebody step in. And you don't have to necessarily have 3 alternates. You can have 1 and see how that works, right?
Right. Yeah, I've only seen abstention probably 2 times or in my 30 years. It's usually an absence is what happens.
Mr. Shepherd.
I wonder if we're at a point where time to consider a motion to just get a sense of the board and to vote to really understand where we all stand on this.
And what sort of motion would you like to propose?
And something along the line of,
Excuse me just a moment. When you make your motion, whoever makes the motion, please be very clear in your mic.
okay, well, right now I'm searching for words as I make the motion. Maybe I nail it. I move that we move forward towards asking the Board of Supervisors to allow us to have, to ask the Board of Supervisors to ask the Circuit Court to appoint an alternate BZA member.
Could I suggest that if you're going to make a motion that you authorize the chairman to write, to write a letter and then have that start your motion as a process, if that's what you want to do. But I apologize for interrupting you, but that's the process. It looks like that.
No, that's
staff
helping.
is in favor of, the chairman announced at the start.
Okay.
The chair. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
It's okay.
Okay, so I move that we authorize the chair to request that the Board of Supervisors request that the Circuit Court appoint an alternate BZA member.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Uh, um, the hesitancy is, okay, let's have some discussion on what the hesitancy is. Mr. Carrington, you want to go ahead and start?
I think I was more just trying to parse through the language. I track with Mr. Shepherd that it's a little bit of a process. You know, some of the very valid reasons to appoint an alternate, in my opinion, are somewhat mitigated by the what was new to me, the code sections that Mr. Herrick read. So there are downstream remedies that I was not aware of that would mitigate some of the benefit. I think my general sense, since we're, I think at that point where we need to make our positions clear, my general sense is that this is a nice to have. I think it's generally positive, and I don't think there's any negative. It might cost a few dollars. I can't imagine that it will be significant. So I don't feel strongly that we need to do it, but I do think there is moderate good that can come of it.
Mr. Burkhart?
I would generally concur with that. I appreciate the work that was put into outlining the reasons, these 6 stated reasons for requesting a BZA member. Again, Mr. Carrington just stated, I too was unaware of some of the remedies that were available to us. But as was just stated, it's so nice to have. I would like to, the 2 things, again, the tie vote is important, making sure that there's clarity and that all parties feel as though they've had their say and were able to have their positions received, understood, debated, discussed, and voted on. I think that that's important, so that there's no question what would have happened if that 5th chair had been filled. Succession is really important together with the experience. I don't know what it was like for this board to sit during the time that the vacancy occurred that I subsequently filled. I don't know how many votes that you had, but I think that, like I said, early on, it's a nice to have, and I could support the request.
Mr. Rosenberg, what are your thoughts, please?
One thing that I've found missing from the entire discussion is any data about votes over time, presence, absences. And I'm not saying that these concerns of the 2-2 tie issue, are they theoretical or realistic? What are the last 5 years of data? How many times has there been lack of quorum? How many times has there been a tie vote? Yeah, 2-2. Basically what I'm wondering with the data that I haven't seen is how serious is this problem? Rather, they're theoretical issues I see everyone is pointing to, and I concur with most of what I've heard, but I just don't know. If this board meets 4 or 5 times a year, and I don't know if that's the frequency that's predictable, how many times does any of this happen? Or has this happened in the recent past? Not 20 years ago, but as I said, how frequently is the board encountering this? And I just haven't heard, there's been this assumption that this is a problem and maybe there was a 2-2 case where recently, and I think there was.
There was.
It was
But-
huge. It was a
Well,
huge
it
case.
was an important matter and, that's why I asked the question of whether the board could defer and I'm a little confused about what I seem to be hearing is that the deferral can come only from the applicant's side if it appears to be an unsatisfactory result, but a tie result. So, but that was an important case. And I understand what you're saying. It's significant. But was that rare? Was that, and then maybe none of us know because we haven't been on this board that long.
We could talk about rare and important, but I think that if you're the appellant, you think it's rare and important to you. So I think that that's the other aspect of this is that the folks who came in for the one that's been appealed to circuit court, they
Right,
didn't have an attorney at the time.
right.
They were a bunch of neighbors that
Right.
got together. So they really didn't know what they could do and what they couldn't do. So I think that's a part of it. In that particular case, it would have been much clearer for them had there been a full board. That's all. And
Well, yeah.
it's,
Was that a 2-2 tie that the staff position was against what the neighbors requested?
yes,
Yeah, I guess it could go either way, depending on what the staff says.
I think that was the most dramatic that I can remember.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking that I'm looking more forwards than backwards. Or I saw the consequence from that recent case. That's certainly front of mind for me. Looking back, like what sorts of what people were thinking about calculating whether to defer or not based on who was on the board when they were not somewhat unknowable. Because the dynamic in these cases would have been different. The lack of a voice, of a particularly strong voice from a certain perspective missing could have an effect on the appellant or the unknowable.
Well, that's hypothetical and kind of totally speculative.
That's what I'm saying. But moving forward, but I think this addresses, that's why I'm saying, I'm thinking back, I don't recall many instances where it would have had any effect at all on how the deferrals worked and all those mechanisms. So, that's why I say I'm looking forward rather than backward. I'm not sure how much like that, how much my opinion would be swayed by the rare instances where this would have been very important in the past. And I'm thinking that a good thing. Personal opinion, but just part of the discussion.
Sure.
well, as I was listening to you all, one of the things that really jumped out to me, Mr. Burkhardt, is what you said about, have we done any research on what other localities have done? And I think that that would be really helpful as something to add to this, just maybe a short paragraph or something saying we've spoken with blah, 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 and here's what they do and here's how they handle it. And here's the problems, here's the rewards or whatever. The other thing, so that could be part of your amendment. An amendment to your, I'm sorry, I want to amend your motion. So if we amend the motion, something like that to add more information on that. And the other amendment I also add is that this letter will be reviewed by all of you before it ever goes to the Board of Supervisors, so that everyone will be able to take a look at it, see what the impact is and whether or not they want it. And in my opinion, you all should have a veto power. So if there's something in there that you don't want, then I'd like us all to agree that we could support that person and remove it. that level of trust in all of us that we could do that. I guess that's what I'm wondering.
Ms. Joseph, can I respond? I think what you suggested was very wise. The other jurisdictional practices. What would be interesting is we have a list of places in point 2 here. But you know, how many do they have as alternates? Do they have 1? Do
Right.
they have 2? Do they have 3? How often has the alternate
Right.
actually participated? You know, never, once in 2 years, you know, some frequency of participation. Let me think of other questions. You can probably think of better ones than I can, but things, you know, that are relevant to the need, basically, because the Board of Supervisors, I would imagine, are going to say, why do we need this? You know, and to answer their questions in advance with the data like this.
Well, the other thing that we can do with staff is talk about the data that you talked about. The
Yeah.
last 5 years, how often have we had a full board? And because of the absence of somebody leaving, somebody
Illness, you know.
dying.
Yeah.
So that how often did we have 4 members and see how that worked? And I think, John, at one point we had like 3. How did that work?
Was it 3?
It was not a good thing.
Typically, but
Yeah.
we were stressed by quorums.
Right.
We were
Well,
stressed.
I think we should not forget the succession
Thumbs
point
out.
that was made of having maybe some people identified as potential successors and do what I heard the necessary steps were to get that person teed up in the event that there was someone retiring or someone
Right,
ill or something permanently withdrawing.
right.
That's a very wise suggestion, I think.
Okay. Do you,
I have a question for you, Madam Chairman. On that 2-2 case that we just talked about recently. I recall that you gave some closing comments regarding appeal
Mhm.
of that, okay?
Mhm.
Is there, would it be appropriate to be able to have that language revised in a way to also mention the opportunity to have the case again deferred? Yeah, reheard, because I'm not sure that that the appellant knew that. I mean, I've come to school board meetings and as testy as they get, we had probably 75 or 80 people in here on that particular case. And I know that there's been questions asked. I don't recall if it was in that one or not, where they ask the county attorney's office for advice, and the response is, we don't give legal advice. That's what you do. I mean, so, but if it's in the statute and that they have the opportunity to have it reheard, should that not be part of your instructions?
absolutely. Yeah. I didn't know until just now.
Same here.
So, yeah,
But the appeal language is like with the term, like just routine determinations that are issued by the zoning administrator. There's always the boilerplate appeal language with the 30-day limit or deadline. Not sure that the neighbors of the gun thing understood that.
no one knows. So if John agrees to the amendments, if Bo agrees to the amendments would be that more research would be provided on BZA alternates in other localities. We'd find some data about what's been happening in the past, maybe 5-6 years, as to how often there were 4 instead of 5. Then I can take a stab at this and send it out to everybody. And we'll see how it goes after that. What I'd really love to do is hope that we can get this to the new board in January, so that they can take a look at it. They may not take action on it, but at least they'll know what's going on. So if that works for
So are we
everybody.
gonna withdraw the motion? So I understood the motion to be deputizing you to go ahead and send the letter on our behalf to the Board of Supervisors. So
Yeah, you
it
can,
sounds like we'll withdraw it.
So you have a motion and a second. It's on the floor at
Right.
present, as I heard it. Is that everybody's understanding?
yes.
Yes.
Yes, we did not vote on that. You authorized me to request the circuit to send a letter to the Board of Supervisors.
I would
Um,
like to change that motion. In my mind, it was like to take the steps in that. What I was looking for before I try to put this in the shape of a motion is to like looking for consensus or at least a majority opinion that we want to take the next step and move forward with this.
Sense of the board, basically, a sense of the board.
Yeah,
just-
but I'm not trying to anticipate all the implications right now, or it might be that as you're composing the letter, more questions come up, more information comes, we have more of a sense of other localities' experiences with this, might change our approach, might so I'm not trying to do something specific here that is gonna tie our hands or, gonna like a final direction to you.
That's
But
fine.
it doesn't sound like we're ready for that.
No, I'm fine. I mean, I'd be happy to draft something off and send it to everybody. That's kind of where I am. And take in all the information that we heard today. And if I didn't hear it all, I'm hoping that you will add to it whatever it needs. I'd be happy to talk to, unless you've met some new buds at the last, when, when you went to Richmond. But you and I could work together, Kurt, if you want to do that, to figure out who we can talk to in these other localities to get some information. Maybe we can come up with a template so that we'll have the same sort of questions that we're asking them that we can use. So we can figure
Sounds
that
good.
out. Okay, great.
You know, I think this is going to be a helpful exercise because I could just see the new board coming, especially a new member that's never been on the board before, stepping up, asking some good questions that might say, as Mr. Rosenberg said, well, over the last couple of years, what's the frequency of absences and how many votes were, resulted in a tie, and where's the compelling need to really do this? So if we've done our homework, and it looks like we've got our ducks in a row, then, we've got a pretty good case if we want to move forward.
Okay.
So where do we stand with
With
the
the motion?
motion? Okay.
Have a motion
let's-
and a second. So if you don't want to proceed with the
Yeah.
motion, then somebody needs to withdraw the motion
I
and
would
so
like to
forth.
withdraw my motion.
Good discussion.
Does that need a second?
Draw my second.
It'll be easy to find.
Draw the amendment.
Okay, we're back to ground
go.
zero.
So we're actually in an agreement between the five of us that we'll go ahead and we'll work on this. We'll work on a letter within a couple of weeks, probably after Thanksgiving. I'll send something out to you and take a look at it, and I will give you a deadline to get it back to us so that we have something that we can present to the board in January.
Then before you send it out, you need to come back and have a meeting and get the board's authorization to do it, because the board can only act at a
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, well, that leads us to our January
January
meeting then,
meeting, yeah.
because we have to have our organizational meeting in January.
Yeah,
So we could do it then, yes?
good.
I mean,
Thank you.
that's seriously, you have
No, I
to,
believe you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I want this to happen correctly. So
Yeah.
thank you.
So the January meeting would.
what you could do is prepare a letter and bring it back to the January meeting so it can be
It's ready
approved
to
at that
go.
time.
Yeah.
Right,
That's another old thing,
right.
of course, you
right.
can take.
Well, it'll be something that you guys have already seen and it'll just be the final and
Right.
Got a question about the January meeting. This past January, we had a whole lot of red that we had to approve, as I recall. in our rules and procedures. The previous year was a lot of cleanup on just language, just a cleanup detail. Do you anticipate that rules and procedures, there's going to be a lot of new stuff added? Anything lurking in the corner that we need to know about?
So no updates from us that I'm aware of, right? This is just a procedure in readopting that so everything stays fresh each year. Once that takes place, probably sometime later in the year, you may end up with a red line depending on what the result of the January meeting is and what the result of the Board of Supervisors decision is. We might have to make some changes there. But I think, Mr. Burkhart, we were in the process of doing some bylaw changes when you were appointed on the board. I think that process may have already started, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure. That we hadn't looked at the bylaws in a number of years. And then we had some COVID things that we had to do and some COVID things we had to undo, that kind of thing was going on. So I think that was all part of that. So as a routine, just part of the routine now, the BZA has indicated to us that we want to review the bylaws every year. And if there's something that sticks out to us in that meeting, then we'll make sure we make the adjustment.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So at that meeting, we would talk about officers, right?
Yes,
And that is also a meeting where we would cover the renewal, which I assume we will do, of Mr. Bowling's contract. Is that when we should? I forget the timing of that, and I know that our recommendation has to be should be in front of the board in time for them to consider it in their normal budgetary process.
Yes, so in anticipation of the BZA wanting to continue utilizing Mr. Bowling's services, we carried over the same amount in the budget that we had last year, partly because we think that you want to take advantage of that still, but also our direction in budget for using the same amount was don't extend any items, don't increase any line items in the budget. So that's why we carried over the same amount. So I don't know whether and so January would be a time to talk about that. To see if there is a desire for any increase based on the way the contract is written. That's something we can talk about at that time, whether or not that amount needs to go up, whether or not, because it's a hourly with a cap annually. So if that's sufficient, I don't know if the hourly matters, except for the frequency of meetings, right? So if we start having a meeting a month, then Mr. Bowling may be requesting the following year, hey, this is a lot different than when we had 4 meetings in a year, 5 meetings.
It's not the frequency of the meeting, it's the length and the thickness of the packet that leads to the meeting.
Yeah, so those are some of the things, but we did include it in our first round of budget submittals, which was last week, Friday. And that item's carried over to this year. Hope that helps.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
but it is something that this group should act on. Yes, as a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors.
That you either support staff's request or you wish to discontinue the Mr. Bowling's services.
But
So
there is an action.
it probably within the budget packet, I think it would be best that the BZA formally say that we want to continue that. I think that's probably the most proper
Okay,
than having staff say that.
okay. And the other thing at that meeting, we'll be setting the agenda or the meetings, actually scheduling the meetings.
Yes.
So we will approve that also. Yes.
Yes.
Is there anything else on that initial meeting that you can think of?
Well, the initial meeting, you'll let your officers and whether or not any of that's going to change. We'll readapt the bylaws. There may be things when you get the packet and review the bylaws that we might talk about and leave the same, or talk about and may want to schedule another meeting to tweak some of that. You'll have your letter that we just talked about for the alternate, right, as part of that. And then the schedule. So the schedule will be laid out. That should all be in your packet. We try and take into account. So like the January meeting is not the first Tuesday, it's the second, because the first Tuesday is the day after the holiday. So we'll take into account the holidays, we'll take into account election day to make sure we make the adjustments. You will still have to approve that within the schedule.
Excuse
You
me,
you
Bart.
look at John's schedule and
Wait
make
a second.
sure.
With the election day, there's actually 3 elections next year. One of them, March 5th,
Okay.
Super Tuesday.
And you, if you don't mind, send me those dates so we make sure we compare those and we don't miss them.
Primary in the summer, but it's farther into June.
Gotcha.
There might be a conflict with the March.
With the March one.
Anybody else think of anything that might be a conflict on that Tuesday?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. If that is the case, is there any new business, anything, anyone?
Just one quick thing I'd
Excuse me.
like to say.
Go ahead.
And that is about the training, which I've been supportive of. I'm glad you, Kurt, went to that and appreciated it. Seemed like a good thing.
Would you mind yielding your time for a moment so that I could briefly address it, and then it sounds like that's a perfect segue into what
Perfect.
you want to talk about? Thank you.
Even better.
Okay, sit back and relax. Well, this is about all I have. Pardon me to show for this, but I'll pass it down to the chair to take a look. And the 3-day course was most interesting. I want to thank Mr. Herring for coming down and doing a presentation. Everybody afterwards during the break thought I was quite fortunate to have someone with your skills and knowledge working with the BZA. So thank you. We had the opportunity to read 3 books. 2 were provided through the course. The 3rd I purchased because I don't do very well with Xerox paper and another binder. As I was mentioning, Mr. Carrington, at the beginning, just before the meeting, the first 2.5 years on this board, pardon me, first 2.5 years on this board, I've done a lot of research. This was out of my wheelhouse. I learned what I could, but what was really interesting was to go there and with the staff and under the direction of Mike Chandler, who's the course director, validated exactly what I'd been doing. I have to say that it gave me a lot to think about. I will probably have a couple of suggestions in our rules and procedures for January that I might wish to put forward for discussion and possible inclusion. But overall, I thought it was a wonderful process, and I would highly recommend that anyone who does not come with some level of experience in this field not require, but highly encourage that person that first year to take this training. It was well worth the time, and I really appreciate Bart, your staff, for picking up the tab on this. Thank you very much. I appreciated it.
Is it possible does the Board of Zoning Appeals have a board budget so that these 3 books could be bought for all the board members? I don't think they'd be very expensive. Or is that a bad subject to bring up?
Not at all. The only thing the budget office or the Board of Supervisors could tell us is no. So currently, we don't have materials scheduled or included in the budget.
I mean, you're willing to pay what, $400 or $500 for
Yeah.
a course, but somebody might want to just read the books instead and
Yeah,
go
so
from
I'll
there.
look at we do have a books and subscription line item within zoning, and we'll look at whether we can move some money around or add some additional stuff so we can cover the cost of the books. If the Spurcard, if you can give me those titles or the cost, so I can budget that in. And whether or not we do one for each or whether we do one for the board, we'll see what we can do.
That would be great,
Yes,
because I think it'd be, it can't do anything but help. It looked like you found it very beneficial,
I did.
So just following up on it, so I have taken classes from Mike Chandler in the past. I think it's great that he's still doing it. I mean, he is sort of a legend in Virginia. In really professionalizing BZA work, zoning, employees work, and just public across the board. I think he does planning commission training and also just, have you done planning commission things with him?
Millions of years ago.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm thousands of years, but anyway, just, encourage it, but I'm also just saying that I was disappointed in the schedule of these hearings because they just create both of the virtual and also in-person conflicts with elections coming up, and I really want a clear head for what's coming in 2024 with that, but I'm interested in, I'd like to keep my finger on this and maybe do this again if a time when it was possible for me. And I just really, I think it's great the more we sort of have a common basis of knowledge and training is a good thing for the way we function.
Thank you for your enthusiasm, because you could have come back and said it was a bust. So I really appreciate you coming back and saying it was a great thing I did.
Well, what's actually kind of twisted in a way is that I couldn't put these things down. I read 3 of these in 1 month and it did, I don't know, 7 or 8 quizzes, had to write a short essay. But I constantly went back to these things because there's great reference from one to the other. And the way it was assigned is you get the zoning 101, then you get this complete guide to zoning, which was really written for realtors. And then this one that he said was out of print. And I later corrected him and said, no, as a matter of fact, the copyright had been purchased by somebody else and now it's reprinted, this Board of Adjustment. So the 3 books just added a whole lot of clarity to what my role is on the BZA. We had 41 people attending about all throughout the state of Virginia. We had, my gosh, we had 5 from Essex County, 5, which was very interesting. But we had our Loudoun counties, we had our Fairfax, we had Herndon. I mean, we had them growing up from all over the state. It was great to talk with others and just hear stories, which you and I will do when we make those phone calls.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any other new business? No. Okay. Then I think that we can go ahead and adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn this lovely meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, all those in favor, please just say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, then we will adjourn the meeting at 3:26. Thank you very much. And Bo, hang on a minute.
30.